Welcome, everybody. In today's show, I'm going to dive into Chapter 2 of The Great Conversation by Robert Maynard Hutchins. He calls this chapter Modern Times. There's a lot going on in this chapter. Most of it is caught up with mid 20th century educational philosophy, and we'll see how Hutchins dukes it out with his prime adversary, John Dewey. We left off Chapter 1 with the pressing question: do the great books have anything to teach us in the modern day? At the time when great books were a part of a liberal education, this education was by and large restricted to the elites in society. And the presumption was that, quote, only those with exceptional intelligence and leisure could understand these books, and that only those who had political power needed to understand them, end quote. As for the unwashed masses, like you and me, they weren't expected to engage with great authors directly, and access to them could be gained at second hand through textbooks. That would suffice. Now, the argument goes like this: times have changed. Nobody really requires a great books education today. It's passé. The problems taken up by the great authors don't speak to our modern day issues. Many of these authors held slaves. They wrote before the rise of modern science and industry. They are old news, or something even worse. Hutchins, of course, begs to differ. He skewers these assumptions, calling them a kind of sociological determinism. And I have an extended quote here I want to share from the chapter. Quote, sociological determinism claims that intellectual activity, at least, is always relative to a particular society, so that if the society changes in an important way, the activity becomes irrelevant. Ideas originating in one state of society can have no bearing on another state of society. Ideas are the rationalizations of the social conditions that exist at any given time. If we seek to use in our own time the ideas of another, we shall deceive ourselves, because by definition, these ideas have no application to any other time than that which produced them. Now, of course, Hutchins disagrees with that sentiment. He insists that human nature is persistent throughout the ages, and certain intellectual problems continue to be faced no matter what the culture or historical era be. While it's true that some problems change over time, in other respects, the same old problems endure. I like to call those ideas big ideas, hence the name of the channel. Hutchins thinks that the great books obliterate sociological determinism because they show that no age speaks with a single voice. There are always disagreements between the conservative and the radical, the practical and the theoretical, the realist and the idealist in every society. And this essentially is what he means by the great conversation. The dialogue went on before, and it continues to this day. Do the dialects change? Of course, but that doesn't eliminate the usefulness of the conversation that has preceded our present age. As he says, quote, we should not reject the help of the sages of former times. We need all the help we can get. Still, the turn of the 20th century ushered in voices who believed that times had indeed changed and that the educational program must change with it. And the chief voice among those voices was that of John Dewey, whom Hutchins calls the most misunderstood of all philosophers in education. Now, Dewey is absolutely a foe in this chapter, but the story is more complicated than it would at first seem. Hutchins treats Dewey with respect and even finds some common ground before standing up to him. In fact, Hutchins blames Dewey's followers much more than Dewey himself for the debacle of education in America. These followers have implemented reforms that, quote, bear little resemblance to Dewey's actual plans, which haven't been tried. He'll explain why this has happened in due course. Now, First is the notion that the object of education is to adjust the young to their environment and teach them to make a living. This is a view that is offered in Dewey's name, but it's one that Dewey himself roundly condemned. As a social reformer, Dewey would never champion the aim that students should adjust to a society that is brutal and unjust. And he called vocational training, quote, narrowing and illiberal, end quote. Dewey would oppose anyone seeking to, quote, differentiate among the young on the basis of their capacity in order to say that only some are capable of acquiring a liberal education. In other words, John Dewey wasn't at all opposed to liberal education for all, but the method for reaching that end is where he and Hutchins disagree. Hutchins finds Dewey's ideas fraught with flaws and impractical. John Dewey's book, Democracy and Education, published in 1916, is his most famous articulation of educational philosophy, and Hutchins examines some passages of containing Dewey's argument here. Dewey advocates for reforms that, quote, utilize various forms of occupation, typifying social callings, to bring out their intellectual and moral content. So the needs and interests of the student dictate what those occupations may be. And it is presumed that this is the only way for the student to genuinely discover their aptitudes and calling in life. I suppose in our modern day, we might call this experiential learning. It probably goes by some other terms too. It's an active learning style. It's results-oriented. It purports to be progressive. And it motivates the learner to acquire whatever liberal education is needed to reach their aims. For Hutchins, the problem lies in the word occupations, a word which gets inevitably welded to the means of earning a living. If that is the focus of education, you start sliding down the slippery slope, ending in vocational training and career prep and social adjustment. However noble Dewey's progressive aims are, this is not the way to achieve them, in Hutchins' view. I think by now we can see where all this indeed has led. It led to aptitude testing, pigeonholing, to seeing education as the means to an end, that being a successful career, and not an end in itself, which might be the life well lived. We've become blinded to the potential of real social change because we're all getting adjusted into the status quo. As Pink Floyd would put it, welcome to the machine. So Dewey's program has unintended consequences. And, in Hutchins' view, it is impractical. Schools cannot be an adequate substitute for apprenticeship. Young people are notoriously whimsical in the variety of interests they have and the rapidity with which those interests change. How can we expect an inexperienced learner to know the ends they seek when those ends can't be known without having some experience? I'll quote Hutchins on this point. Quote, imitation experiences in the classroom are not a substitute for actual experiences in life. Such experiences can only lead to illusion. They lead the pupil to think he understands something when he does not. And he doesn't think we should obsess over occupations. Does this obsession not crowd out other concerns, like what to do with our leisure time and the duties of democratic citizenship? What on earth do occupations have to say about that? Are we not already at the stage where, quote, we are now so wrapped up in our own occupations and special interests that nobody looks after the common good? Is not the study of occupations the way to hasten the disintegration of such community as still remains through emphasizing our individuality at the expense of our common humanity? To close the chapter, Hutchins turns to Dewey's prescient awareness, his forecasting that our increasingly mechanized society would pose real social problems. Namely, how can we humanize work that is increasingly dehumanizing? But Dewey's methods are not the solution, in Hutchins' view. He has a different idea. Workers must be educated to possess good minds, minds that can think critically and excellently. Quote, everybody should have equal access to the kind of education most likely to develop such a mind. The man who acquires some intellectual excellence and intends to go on acquiring more will, to borrow a phrase from Dewey, reconstruct and reorganize his experience. We need have few fears that he will not be able to learn how to make a living. In addition, he will inquire critically about the kind of life he leads while making a living. The great books are the best means to humanize work through understanding. That's what Hutchins thinks. What do you think? Are you more on Dewey's side or Hutchins' side? Are Hutchins' critiques of Dewey valid? I'd love to know your thoughts. Leave a comment. And please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel so you don't miss future episodes. Thanks for watching. And next time, we're going to move on to the next chapter in the book, which is Education and Economics. Until then, be well. See you soon.